Gus Fring's death in Breaking Bad Season 4 was one of the show's most shocking moments, but questions remain over whether Gus's death was realistic. The questions surrounding Breaking Bad's famous death scene stem from the moments Gus walked away after a pipe bomb exploded, obliterating half of his face. Though he did succumb to his injuries shortly, it does seem odd that Gus wasn't killed instantly given the seriousness of his injuries. While the end for the chilling Breaking Bad villain was certainly chilling, for some it didn't sit well with the rest of the show's tone. Gus cared more about Walt's skill and quickly arranged to replace him, something Walt eventually caught wind of. Walt had no choice but to kill Gus, so he cooked up a plan using his rival's enemy, Hector Salamanca. Breaking Bad's Gus death scene definitely raised some viewers' eyebrows because of its execution. Viewers quickly asked whether it was possible for someone to walk away after suffering similar injuries, and whether the death of Gus in Breaking Bad was an unrealistic moment in an otherwise grounded show. How Gus died in Breaking Bad. The death of Gustavo Fring was one of Breaking Bad's most gruesome. Giancarlo Esposito as Gustavo Fring dying in Breaking Bad Season 4 Episode 13 with half of his face blown off. Gus died in Breaking Bad due to a pipe bomb planted by Walt and detonated by Hector Salamanca. With the pipe bomb equipped in his wheelchair, Hector carried out the assassination of Gus, but his death wasn't instantaneous. After the bomb detonated in Hector's nursing home, Gus walked out of the room seemingly unharmed, at least until his face is fully in view, that is. However, his final moments in Breaking Bad unambiguously confirmed Gus Fring's death, but it drew the moment out. It wasn't until the camera panned to his right side that viewers learned that half of Gus' face was blown off. His right eye socket was empty and the side of his face was bare flesh. He also had wounds all over his right shoulder and hand. Still, despite his horrific injuries, he wasn't quite finished, as Gus still managed to fix his tie before collapsing and dying. How Breaking Bad pulled off Gus' iconic death. CGI was used for Gus Fring's injuries. To create Gus Fring's death in Breaking Bad, the show's crew had to dip into a well it didn't often use: visual effects. While much of Gus' Breaking Bad demise was achieved via practical prosthetic makeup appliances attached to Giancarlo Esposito's face, there was no realistic way to bring to life the effect they needed without augmenting the practical work with CGI. Similar to Two-Face The Dark Knight appearance, half of Gus' face was covered in a layer of CGI enhancement. All in all, the effect was seamless, and it enabled Breaking Bad's Gus death scene to become something that viewers will never, ever forget. Gus Fring's death is possible, but not realistic. The death of Gus in Breaking Bad requires some suspension of disbelief. Many medical professionals have provided insight into Gus' death scene in Breaking Bad since Face Off aired. Because of this, there is a loose explanation why he wasn't killed instantly. Since Gus heard Hector's bell and realized the plan, Gus probably turned his body and tried to get out of the way. The blast wave severely injured his right side, but it didn't hit his vital organs, which could explain why the Gus Fring death in Breaking Bad wasn't immediate. Much of Gus' head and face were injured, but his skull was still intact. In real life, it actually is common for people who have suffered severe injuries and trauma to continue using motor functions like walking and talking, as seen in Mike Ehrmantraut's Breaking Bad death scene. After the explosion, Gus would have been in shock, which is why he so calmly walked out of the room. His body wouldn't have recognized the pain, and the burst of adrenaline would have possibly given him enough time to walk a few steps before his body failed him. Breaking Bad's Gus Fring death scene is possible, but not realistic to every degree. Even if he didn't die right away, the Gus Fring death scene was clearly exaggerated to allow the audience to think that perhaps he might have survived before revealing the gruesome remains of his head. To Walt, Gus was almost like a monster he couldn't get rid of. Even on the brink of death, Gustavo Fring remained unfazed, which made the situation even creepier. This could be attributed to Breaking Bad showrunner Vince Gilligan prioritizing art over realism, but there's also no doubt that it made for one unforgettable scene that will go down in television history. Gus Fring's death is visually exaggerated, but it shows realistic consequences. The moment highlighted the inevitable collision of Gus and Hector. Breaking Bad giving Gus Fring such a brutal and painful death is ultimately a lesson in how cruelty inevitably leads to comeuppance, typically from an unexpected source. While there's certainly poetry to Gus and Hector being responsible for each other's deaths, the moment is simply the realistic conclusion of a long and bitter criminal rivalry. Indeed, it was Gus who enabled Hector to be trapped in a position where he could neither speak nor move, which in turn was Gus' response not only to Hector killing Gus' partner but also to Hector's extremely hateful and disrespectful attitude.